The ocean, when observed from a great distance, appears quiet. A long stretch of deep blue that expands beyond the edge of the world, soft and unbroken, like a piece of silk placed gently over the earth. But for sailors who have spent their lives navigating its restless tracks, the sea is not quiet at all. It breathes, it murmurs, and sometimes it remembers. And if there is any place on this vast planet where the ocean's memory feels strongest, it is that wide, triangular stretch of open water between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, a region known today as the Bermuda Triangle. But long before it gained this name, long before maps showed dotted lines marking strange disappearances, long before pilots radioed their final confused messages into the static, this place was simply called the sea that does not return. It was an old phrase, older than any modern maritime chart, whispered among early voyagers of the Caribbean. Not spoken with fear. No, fear was too sharp, too sudden. Rather, it was spoken with a kind of quiet respect, the kind given to ancient things that move in ways the human mind cannot entirely follow. Tonight, as we drift slowly into the first chapter of this long voyage through time, we will walk gently along the edges of this mysterious region, not as frightened travelers, but as patient observers, listening to what history, memory, and the murmurs of the sea might choose to reveal. So settle in. Let the sound of soft waves and fire crackling guide your thoughts. Let the past rise slowly, like the tide returning to shore. For this is a story not of horror, but of quiet ancient mystery, the kind that deepens the more calmly you look at it. The first navigators long before Europeans crossed the Atlantic, the indigenous peoples of the Caribbean, the Taino, the Lucian, and the Carib, knew the surrounding seas intimately. They built long canoes carved from ceiba trees and followed ocean currents like trails on land. To them, the waters between the islands held patterns, not danger. They noticed currents that flowed like slow rivers beneath the waves' winds that arrived with gentle precision stars that guided the night journey, and the faint humming of distant storms long before the clouds appeared. But even they spoke softly about one particular region, not because it frightened them, but because something about the waters felt old, as though the sea itself had a memory deeper than any human life. They had stories, not warnings, about places where the horizon shimmered more than usual, where birds changed direction, where the sea seemed to shift beneath the canoe in ways that were difficult to describe. One Taino elder, speaking to a Spanish chronicler in the early 16th century, described a region where the water has many moods and where journeys sometimes take longer than they should. Not storms, not monsters, just moods. It is interesting, when looking back at these early observations, how calm they sound. There were no tales of vanishing ships or cursed waters. Instead, they spoke as people who understood nature's quiet complexities. For the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle in its earliest form did not begin with disappearance, but with strangeness, a subtle strangeness, the kind you notice only when you have watched the sea for many years. And it is here, in these gentle yet curious observations, that our long journey truly begins. Columbus and the unusual light in 1492, as Christopher Columbus sailed across the Atlantic on his first voyage. His logbook recorded something curious near the area we now identify as the Bermuda Triangle. His crew had already noted strange compass variations several days earlier. Nothing dramatic, just slight differences between the compass heading and the direction of the North Star. For sailors of the time, this was puzzling, but not terrifying. Compasses were young instruments, imperfect and strange in their own way. But one night, as the sea remained calm and the moon glowed faintly across the surface, Columbus wrote about a flame like light rising and falling far in the distance. Not a fire on land, there was no land there. Not lightning, there were no clouds. Not another ship, no vessel would have carried fire that high. He described it simply as a small wax-like flame that rose and fell, appearing and disappearing. Historians have debated this for centuries. Some say it was a meteor dipping low over the horizon. Some say it was bioluminescent sea life, flickering unusually bright. Others believe it was a distant indigenous canoe with a torch, though this seems unlikely given the distance offshore. Whatever it was, Columbus did not write of fear, only curiosity. He watched it for a while silent as the ocean moved gently beneath the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria. Eventually, the light faded. The ships continued onward. The moment became a footnote in a long voyage, but the sea does not forget. And across generations, that soft, flickering light near the water's edge became one of the earliest recorded mysteries of this region. A mystery told not with terror, but with wonder. Winds, currents, and the great Atlantic gyre. To understand the Bermuda Triangle's story, one must understand the ocean itself. This part of the Atlantic sits within the North Atlantic Gyre, a vast circular system of currents shaped by the Earth's rotation, the trade winds, and the shape of continents. Here, the waters do not move in simple straight lines. They arc gracefully, curve gently, and loop in wide circles. The Gulf Stream, one of the most powerful currents on Earth, rushes through the western edge of the triangle, moving faster than many rivers on land. Sailors who entered it without expecting its force would find their ships carried miles away from their intended route within hours, quietly, almost invisibly. To early navigators, this invisible river created the illusion that ships had drifted sideways, or even backward without wind. Over centuries, such experiences grew into legends. Ships that wandered, journeys that took longer than planned, vessels seen in one place but later found far off course again, not supernatural events. Natural phenomena, but strange enough to leave deep impressions on the human mind. And when a mystery is repeated often enough, it eventually becomes part of the place itself. The first disappearances, it may surprise many to learn that the earliest records of missing vessels in this region date back not to the 20th century, but to the age of wooden sailing ships. In the 1600s and 1700s, European merchant ships traveling between the Caribbean and North America sometimes vanished without explanation. Hurricanes were one cause, of course, but sailors often noted something different. Some disappearances happened in calm weather. Some ships were found later but miles off their routes. Some simply never arrived. Yet in those days, the sea was vast and navigation was imprecise. A ship failing to reach port was not uncommon. So these events, too, were not spoken with fear, but with quiet resignation, as though the sea had simply taken a different path. Over time, the region developed a quiet reputation, not cursed, not haunted, simply different. A place where the wind shifted strangely, where compasses behaved unusually, where currents held their own secret routes. A place where the sea whispered softly, and a place where, even in calm weather, the horizon sometimes felt farther than it should. A region without a name. It is important to remember that the phrase Bermuda Triangle did not appear until the mid-20th century. Centuries before, sailors described the region only with gentle phrases. The sea of shifting paths, the waters of many currents, the place where the sky bends. These old nautical expressions hint not at supernatural fear, but at something deeper. The awareness that this corner of the Atlantic behaved in ways both subtle and strange. And as centuries passed, ship after ship moved through the area, each leaving its own quiet mark upon the long memory of the sea. Some voyages were perfectly ordinary. Some were unusual. A few were strange enough to be written down in logs or whispered among sailors at night. And all of these stories, the known and the forgotten, the recorded and the unrecorded, slowly shaped the early soul of the Bermuda Triangle. Tonight, we walk not through the sensational tales, but through the calm, ancient foundations upon which those tales were built. The calm before the more famous mysteries, before the world heard of Flight 19, before the USS Cyclops vanished. Before modern technology entered the region and found anomalies it could not fully explain, the Bermuda Triangle had already lived through centuries of whispered stories. Stories without monsters. Stories without fear. Stories carried by sailors leaning against wooden rails as the moon drifted above the mast. They spoke of lights that danced at the horizon, currents that shifted unexpectedly, calm seas that felt strangely heavy, and compass needles that wavered for a moment, then corrected themselves. Small mysteries. Quiet mysteries. The kind that stay with a place because the place, in its own way, chooses to keep them. And as we slowly conclude this first chapter of our long journey, we remain in these early centuries. A time when the Bermuda Triangle was not yet a dramatic legend, but a region of gentle curiosities waiting patiently to be understood. A sea before the stories became stories. A memory before the memory became myth. And so, as the echoes of the ancient world softened into the night, we drift forward, deeper into the Triangle's long, mysterious history. Toward the next chapter of this journey across forgotten waters, the sea at dusk changes its character in ways that are subtle yet unmistakable. As daylight softens, the surface of the water becomes smoother, flatter, as though the ocean is holding its breath before night settles across it. The early sailors of the Atlantic knew this moment well, this quiet pause when the horizon dimmed and the world grew softer. In this gentle darkness, the mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle became easier to notice. Not because anything dramatic happened at dusk, but because the human mind becomes sharper when the world grows quiet. Navigation lights flickered into existence, compasses glowed faintly, and the sounds of the ocean, soft waves, distant birds, creaking wood, grew more pronounced. Part 2 of our long journey enters this quiet. We drift further into the centuries where exploration expanded, maps grew clearer, and ships grew larger. Yet the triangle remained a place where even experienced navigators felt a presence of something old. Not threatening, not supernatural, but ancient, like a region of the sea that had seen more than any human could ever record. Let us return to those waters now. The age of exploration expands by the 1700s and 1800s. The Atlantic was no longer a mysterious ocean to European powers. Trade routes connected continents, and ships crossed these waters in such numbers that the sea felt like a broad, shifting highway. Still, navigational challenges abounded. Unpredictable winds, sudden storms, hidden reefs, vast currents, and long distances between safe harbors. The region now known as the Bermuda Triangle sat at the crossroads of many of these elements, and as maritime travel increased, so too did the stories surrounding it. Yet these early accounts were not dramatic tales of disappearance. Rather, they were curious observations by men trained to understand the sea. Journal entries often contained passages like, "The sails hang strangely despite a steady wind. The compass insists upon a slight eastern drift. The water beneath the hull feels thick tonight, as though something pulls softly below. The stars tilt oddly, perhaps it is my own eyes." These lines, written in worn leather logbooks, reveal something more subtle than danger, the sensation of being watched by the sea itself. Not with malice, not with sentience, but with the quiet awareness of a vast natural world far older than the vessels moving through it. And this feeling, this gentle, indescribable sense of strangeness, became part of the Bermuda Triangle's earliest mystique. A sea without landmarks, one of the most challenging aspects of navigating the triangle during this era was its lack of stationary markers. Before the age of GPS, navigators relied on stars, the sun, compasses, waves, and the direction of the wind, but here, in this part of the Atlantic, these guides sometimes behaved in unexpected ways. The sky, because the region sits near the edge of the Sargasso Sea, the air is unusually clear. At night, stars appear sharper and more numerous than in many other parts of the world. This clarity, paradoxically, caused confusion when clouds were absent for too long. Navigators felt disoriented by the overwhelming number of visible stars. The water, the ocean here, shifts through a spectrum of blues, from the deep navy of the Gulf Stream to the glowing turquoise near Bermuda's shallows. For sailors used to predictable watercolors, these changes could subtly distort perception of distance and depth. The wind trade winds blow steadily across the region, but even these winds sometimes behave strangely, slowing without warning or shifting direction slightly. Individually, these factors were not alarming. Together, they created the sense of a world slightly askew, a place where measurement itself became a little less certain, a place where the sea asked the traveler to pay attention. The mystery of magnetic north by the late 1800s, a deeper layer of curiosity emerged. Navigators began noticing a peculiar phenomenon. Certain parts of the triangle displayed unusual magnetic behavior. For most of the world, a compass does not point exactly to true north, but to magnetic north, an invisible point influenced by Earth's magnetic field. But there are a handful of places on Earth where true north and magnetic north line up perfectly. The Bermuda Triangle is one of those places. At least, it was during certain historical periods, when sailors accustomed to making slight corrections for magnetic drift suddenly entered a region where no correction was needed. Their calculations became inaccurate. A difference of even a few degrees could send a ship miles off course over time. Again, nothing supernatural, just nature acting in its own quiet, unusual way. But these small shifts left impressions on sailors who had lived entire lives trusting the familiarity of a compass. When that trust wavered, even for a moment, the memory remained. Such memories, repeated over generations, became legends. Soft legends, curious legends, legends told not to frighten but to ponder. The Sargasso Sea, a floating forest. To understand the triangle fully, we must drift into the heart of the Sargasso Sea, a region entirely surrounded by ocean currents and filled with vast floating mats of golden-brown seaweed called sargassum. For early sailors, encountering this calm, shrub-like mass of drifting vegetation felt like entering another world. Imagine, for a moment, a ship sailing forward into a quiet ocean where the water thickens with floating seaweed stretching beyond the horizon. There are no waves, no birds, no sound but the creak of the ship and the whisper of wind. To sailors, this silence felt ancient. Some described it as a sea without movement. Others said it felt like the ocean had gone to sleep. The Sargasso Sea moves with the currents but has no clear boundaries. Ships once feared it might trap them, though in reality it only slowed their progress. Still, the imagery left an impression, one that later writers would use to define the triangle's reputation. The truth is far more peaceful. The Sargasso Sea is a cradle of life, a nursery for baby eels, fish, and countless marine creatures. It is a calm, sunlit place where the ocean seems to rest. Yet its calmness in the midst of surrounding powerful currents feels almost too calm. A stillness inside motion, a silence inside movement. And for sailors crossing into these warm, quiet waters after days of wind and waves, the shift felt dreamlike. For some, it felt like crossing an invisible border, a line between the ordinary sea and a place where time moves differently. Not slower, not faster, just differently. The first scientific expeditions in the 1800s and early 1900s, scientific voyages began to cross the Atlantic with increasing regularity. Naturalists, oceanographers, and explorers sought to document the unique ecosystems of the Sargasso Sea and the weather patterns of the North Atlantic. What they discovered added new layers to the triangle's quiet mystery. Deep, warm waters, the waters here are extraordinarily deep, among the deepest in the Atlantic. Yet they are also unusually warm due to the Gulf Stream's influence. This combination creates faint atmospheric effects. Mirages on the horizon, shimmering reflections, distortions of distant ships, unusual cloud formations. These subtle visual illusions contributed to early stories of ships appearing closer than they were islands, seeming to drift the horizon, bending slightly in the heat, all natural, all quietly mysterious. Sailors' letters home, while logbooks recorded navigation data, private letters often captured the true emotional impressions of the triangle. One 19th century captain wrote to his wife, "There is a stillness in these waters that I cannot describe. The men speak little, for it feels as though the sea itself listens." Another wrote, "We drifted through the floating weed for 3 days. At night the water glowed faintly beneath the moon, and it seemed the horizon shifted while we slept." A third wrote, "This sea carries a memory. I cannot place it, but it is felt by all aboard." These were not tales of fear. They were gentle observations, human attempts to understand a place that felt old and contemplative. A growing reputation as the centuries passed, the Bermuda Triangle's identity slowly evolved. Stories accumulated, not dramatic stories, but curiosities. A ship that arrived several days late with no clear explanation, a compass that behaved strangely for an hour, a calm sea where the wind inexplicably ceased, a drifting vessel found far from its intended route alone. Each story was simple. Together they created a pattern. By the early 1900s, sailors spoke of the region with quiet reverence, not dread, not superstition. Something gentler, much like standing in an ancient cathedral where the air feels heavier, though you do not know why. This reputation set the stage for the more famous mysteries that would follow in the 20th century. But before the dramatic headlines, before the speculation, there was only this, a part of the ocean behaving in ways that encouraged contemplation, patience, and silent respect. Approaching the modern age as ships transitioned from sails to steam and steam to early engines, the Atlantic changed again. Journeys became faster. Weather forecasts improved. Navigation instruments grew more advanced. And yet, strangely, the triangle's quieter mysteries did not fade. If anything, the advent of new technology made people notice these mysteries more, not because the sea changed, but because expectations had changed. Pilots and captains expected precision. The ocean, however, continued its ancient patterns, and the small discrepancies, the moments when instruments disagreed or routes shifted unexpectedly, became even more intriguing. It was in this era of technology meeting timeless ocean that the Bermuda Triangle slowly transformed from a sailor's quiet curiosity into a broader global enigma. But that story belongs to the next chapters. Thus, the mystery rested once more beneath the quiet passage of time, and our journey drifts onward, toward the approaching modern tales of the Triangle, slowly, peacefully into deeper waters. Night descends differently over the open ocean. In cities, darkness arrives with the flicker of lamps and the hum of distant streets. In forests, it blends with the rustle of leaves and the quiet shifting of animals. But over the vast Atlantic, darkness settles with a kind of graceful inevitability, an ancient rhythm untouched by centuries of human progress. In the early 20th century, when technology was rising, engines were humming, and navigation instruments were evolving, the ocean remained unchanged. The Bermuda Triangle, in particular, continued its timeless patterns, indifferent to the new machines crossing its waters. And it was here, where the modern world first brushed against the ancient sea, that the next era of quiet mystery began. Part 3 takes us into this transformative period, a time of steamships and early aircraft, a time of innovation meeting the unknown, a time when the ocean's silence seemed to deepen, as if observing humanity's growing ambition with calm curiosity. Let us drift into that era now. The dawn of engines and steel by the early 1900s, the sailing vessels of old were slowly giving way to steel-built steamships. These ships moved faster and farther than any wooden vessel could, and for the first time, large stretches of the Atlantic were crossed with predictable schedules. Yet the waters of the Triangle retained their old habits. Currents still curved in gentle arcs. Warm and cool water layers still clashed in ways that blurred the horizon. The Gulf Stream still swept ships miles from their intended paths without warning, and the sky, especially at dawn and dusk, still shimmered in ways that puzzled even experienced captains. The ocean offered no resistance to the new technology. It simply continued being itself, but now humanity expected precision. And where expectation grows, curiosity follows close behind. The age of radio, one of the most profound changes of this era, was the arrival of the shipboard radio. For centuries, a vessel at sea had been isolated, its fate unknown until it reached port or washed ashore. Now, with the crackling of early wireless signals, ships could speak across great distances. They could report whether conditions, position, travel, delay, unusual observations, and occasionally silence. A ship that had been sending clear messages could suddenly stop transmitting, not with a cry for help, not with a warning, just a sudden, calm absence. Silence gained new significance in this era. Where once it meant nothing, now it meant something had changed. Sometimes the silence was explainable, an equipment malfunction, a storm, a broken antenna. But in a few rare cases, silence lingered without explanation. And when these events happened within the region between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, they added new layers to the Triangle's growing legend. But let us not rush to the well-known stories yet. There is still much to understand before reaching those iconic moments. The waters beneath the ships as steamships crossed the Triangle with increasing frequency, oceanographers began studying the deep waters beneath them. They found something remarkable. The seabed of the Bermuda Triangle is unlike most regions of the Atlantic. It contains deep undersea valleys, steep drop-offs, shifting sediments, pockets of methane hydrates, and vast, quiet plains beneath thousands of meters of water. These natural formations had existed for countless millennia, but only now were scientists beginning to notice them. The ocean floor here falls abruptly into the Puerto Rico Trench, the deepest point in the entire Atlantic Ocean. Its depth, nearly 8.5 kilometers, creates a unique underwater environment where silence is absolute, light never reaches, and pressure is immeasurable by early 20th century instruments. For ships that sank accidentally, this meant one thing: they disappeared into depths unreachable by the technology of that era. Not because the sea was malicious, but because it was vast, far vaster than any human-made machine of the time could contend with. And thus many shipwrecks vanished without trace, becoming silent echoes in the Triangle's long memory. Atmospheric illusions as engines replaced sails, ships could now push through mist and fog, ignoring conditions that once would have halted travel. But the Triangle is home to a unique phenomenon. Light behaves strangely here, not dramatically, not supernaturally, but subtly. Because of the warm water from the Gulf Stream meeting cooler air above, mirages and atmospheric distortions sometimes appear along the horizon. These distortions can make distant ships appear closer, islands seem larger, the sky bends, slightly clouds form unusual shapes, stars appear misaligned to the human eye, trained or untrained. These effects feel uncanny. Sailors describe them with calm wonder. The horizon seemed to rise as we sailed. A distant island shimmered like heat above desert sand. The sea glowed faintly despite the moon being hidden. Stars reflected in the water unusually bright tonight. Not frightening, just curious. Just ancient natural patterns continuing as they always had. But the more technology advanced, the more these patterns stood out, like a quiet reminder that the sea still held secrets too old to be measured. Early aircraft enter the story. By the 1920s and 1930s, aircraft began crossing the Atlantic. These early planes were fragile compared to modern standards. Short-range, limited navigation tools, unreliable compasses, open cockpits sensitive to wind, pilots often relied on simple instruments and clear skies. But over the Triangle, clouds could form suddenly, rising from warm waters into tall columns that blocked visibility and confused early navigation. Pilots wrote about sudden white haze forming without warning, unexpected magnetic drift, unusual stillness above the Sargasso Sea, cloud walls appearing like silent mountains. One pilot described it famously as a sky made of shifting glass. Another wrote, the sea below was flat as stone and the horizon disappeared into light. And a third wrote, the compass swayed like a pendulum, then returned as though nothing had happened. These were not tales of terror. They were observations, quiet, intrigued, puzzled. The kind of memories that stay with a traveler long after the journey ends. The mystery of calm waters in the era of early aircraft and steamships, meteorologists also began taking note of something unusual in the region. Sometimes the ocean became exceptionally calm, so calm that the surface looked like dark glass. Such calmness is rare on the open sea. This stillness, when combined with distant winds, created an eerie but beautiful effect. The surface of the water mirrored the sky perfectly. Ships appeared to float in air, birds seemed to fly through water, and the horizon vanished into a pale blur. Travelers described this moment often. We could not tell where sea ended and sky began. It felt as though we had entered a world made of mirrors. Silence sat on the deck like a companion. The air was warm, the water still, a strange peace. These descriptions, collected across decades, paint a picture not of fear, but of an ancient calmness, an ocean pausing its breath even as humanity sped forward through time. Technology creates new mysteries as compasses improved and radios became more reliable. Something unexpected happened. Even high-quality instruments occasionally behaved strangely within the triangle. Again, not dramatic, just brief moments of confusion. A compass drifting a few degrees off course. A radio signal fading unexpectedly. A navigational reading momentarily misaligning. These small discrepancies, most lasting only seconds, felt larger in an era that began relying heavily on precision. Pilots and captains recorded such moments with scientific interest. The needle drifted east, then corrected. Coordinates briefly disagreed, then aligned. A soft static whispered through the headset. The altimeter fluctuated, then stabilized. These incidents were not dangerous on their own. They were simply hints, soft reminders that the Earth's magnetic and atmospheric systems are more complex than humans once believed. But when these subtle events happened in a region already carrying centuries of quiet legend, they took on new meaning. A growing reputation, a gentle mystery, a sense that the modern world did not fully erase the ancient one beneath it. A region observed, yet unexplained by the mid-20th century, the Bermuda Triangle had become a point of fascination for oceanographers, meteorologists, pilots, sailors, writers, not because it was frightening, but because it was different. A crossroads where deep ocean trenches, warm currents, shifting winds, magnetic variations, and atmospheric distortions all met in one place. Science could explain much of it. Yet the deeper mystery remained, not one of danger, but of complexity. A region where natural phenomena intertwined so elegantly that the human mind could not help but wonder. And as we move onward in this long journey, we approach the era when the Triangle's quiet reputation would soon become a global topic of discussion, not through fear, but through curiosity heightened by modern events. Before we reach those iconic stories, we remain here for a moment longer, in the age of early technology where humanity first realized. The sea may be mapped, but it is never fully understood. The sky may be charted, but it still holds old secrets. And the Bermuda Triangle may be traveled, but it moves in rhythms older than any machine. Thus, the old waters and the new world met gently, each shaping the other, yet neither surrendering its mystery. And our journey continues onward, deeper into the unfolding pages of time. Night had stretched itself across the western Atlantic like an ancient curtain of velvet as the ship pushed slowly across the calm black water. The engines hummed in a low, steady rhythm, and the sky hung open in a swirl of quiet starlight. The air felt different here, thinner, somehow quieter, as if the world itself listened to each small sound with an old and patient ear. By sunrise, the pale horizon began to glow with a gentle amber tint. It was the kind of dawn that moved slowly, as though unsure whether it wished to appear fully or remain hidden beneath the ocean's waiting breath. And in that soft transition between darkness and light, the older stories began to rise once more, stories that sailors once whispered only when the sea was calm enough to hear its own memory. The Bermuda Triangle, an area not unique in shape, nor marked on any official map, became known through patterns, disappearances, and fading signals that accumulated over centuries. Not all of these were dramatic, nor sudden, nor surrounded by storms or strange lights. Some of them vanished in silence. The sea does not only roar, sometimes it simply takes quietly. And it was within that stillness that many of the Triangle's most puzzling incidents were born. The gentle departures, there were old logbooks full of accounts from fishermen and small crew schooners, vessels that had moved through these waters long before radio, before engines, before navigation was anything more than a compass, a chart, and a practiced eye. Many of these mariners wrote in a style that felt almost poetic by modern standards, slow and thoughtful, full of description rather than urgency. They spoke of drifting fogs that rolled in without feeling damp, currents that shifted without wind, silences that deepened without cause. To these early sailors, the sea was not merely a route. It was an ancient being, something to be read carefully, respected wholeheartedly, and followed humbly. One such account belonged to Captain Elijah Merrow, a quiet New England mariner whose notebooks were found decades later in his family's attic. His entries were not dramatic, but deeply observational, describing long journeys that had taken him through what would one day be called the Bermuda Triangle. In the spring of 1858, Merrow wrote, "There are places in these waters where the sea seems to breathe slower. We passed them today. The men felt it before they saw anything unusual, as if the air grew old and the horizon grew thin." He did not describe monsters nor storms, only a subtle drifting sensation, as if the ship moved through layers of time rather than miles of water. He continued, "When the fog came, it was silver in color, and the surface of the water had no visible movement. The sails did not flutter, the sea did not speak. It was as though the world around us stood still for a moment longer than it should." 2 days later, a small supply vessel that had been following Merrow's route disappeared entirely. No wreckage, no distress signal, no report. Only the final line in their own logbook: "Water calm, visibility fair, changing course slightly west." After that, silence. Merrow never claimed anything supernatural. Instead, he wrote, "Some seas hide their own paths, and those who cross them must know that even silence can mislead." Historians would later find nothing unusual about weather records from that period. Oceanographers found no storms, no strong currents, no seismic activity. It was simply as if a ship had slipped into a space where the world forgot to keep track of its passage. This was not the only such vanishing. For centuries, small vessels, fishing boats, courier ships, merchant transports, disappeared not in chaos but in quiet. And it is this silence that casts the longest shadow. The drift of time by the early 20th century, as navigation improved and systems became more reliable, the patterns became clearer. Ships that vanished often did so near unusual oceanic boundaries, areas where warm and cool waters brushed softly against one another, creating gentle but unpredictable currents. These boundaries shifted slowly, like the breathing of a sleeping giant. Sailors described moments where their compasses drifted not wildly, but delicately, a slow rotation, a subtle pull, as though the needle wished to lean toward a memory rather than a direction. A 1911 crewman aboard the vessel Morning Finch recorded, "Our compass did not spin, it merely disagreed with itself." Ship went off course by nearly 40 miles without the crew noticing, a displacement so smooth they believed they were still on the right heading. Only when land failed to appear did they realize something was wrong. It took them 6 days to correct their path, and when they returned to the mainland, they discovered that reports had already circulated claiming the ship had gone missing. Authorities had assumed it was lost. The captain wrote, "We were not lost. The sea simply placed us where we did not expect to." This gentle displacement, the quiet movement of vessels into unexpected positions, became one of the Triangle's lesser-known mysteries. Not sensational, but deeply puzzling. How could a ship drift so far without wind strong enough to push it, without current fast enough to carry it, without instruments warning of change? Whatever the mechanism, it did not act with force. It acted with subtlety. The luminous tides, there were also accounts of soft lights, not bright, not frightening, but pale green or blue glows shimmering beneath the water's surface. These were not lightning, nor reflections from the sky. They moved with the tides, flickering gently like lanterns drifting through deep water. Modern science might attribute these to bioluminescent organisms, plankton blooms, or certain species of deep-sea creatures. But the patterns noted by sailors felt different, synchronous, rhythmic, almost purposeful. A British vessel passing through in 1929 described, "A line of pale lights beneath the sea, appearing as though some quiet procession traveled below our keel. They moved neither fast nor slow, simply steady. There was no danger, no storm, only a sense that the ocean held more layers than could be seen at once." And often, after these lights appeared, strange occurrences followed. Compass readings that shifted slightly, currents that grew uncertain, fog that thickened gently. Like breath upon glass, none of these events were violent. They were simply unusual, calm but unexplainable. Some historians suggest that the luminous tides may be connected to pockets of unusual magnetic minerals beneath the seafloor. Others believe the lights were natural but misinterpreted. And some, those who studied the Triangle for years, suspect that these luminous movements may indicate boundaries between oceanic regions that behave differently from ordinary tides. Whatever the truth, the sailors who witnessed them wrote of the lights with respect, not fear. The map of forgotten routes as the 20th century progressed. More detailed mapping of the ocean floor revealed unusual formations beneath the Triangle, ridges, trenches, and fragmented plateaus that hinted at a very ancient and turbulent geological past. oceanographers discovered evidence of. Gentle undersea slides, shifting sediment layers, localized magnetic anomalies, soft, unpredictable microcurrents. None of these theories explained everything. Yet each provided a piece of the puzzle, a puzzle that did not speak loudly, but in soft, persistent murmurs. One marine researcher, Dr. Lyon Holt, described the region as a place where the Earth has not fully settled. She believed that the quiet anomalies, compass drift, unexpected calm zones, fog that behaved strangely, were clues left behind by a landscape still adjusting itself beneath the waves. For thousands of years, these subtle shifts may have created pockets where navigation behaved unpredictably, not in dramatic, dangerous ways, but gentle, misleading ones, like a book whose pages were slightly misaligned, or a path that curved where the traveler thought it ran straight. Holt's work suggested that the triangle's greatest mystery might not be disappearance, but misdirection, a gentle movement of ships into paths where they were never meant to go. The listening ocean, even today, sailors who cross this region report something not quite measurable, a sense that the sea carries an older rhythm, a quiet pulse beneath its surface. They speak of moments where the horizon appears unusually distant air that feels heavier without humidity, wind that pauses, as if waiting water that grows still without reason. These experiences are subtle, easily ignored by modern travelers. Yet those who pay attention often describe the region with the same words used centuries earlier: ancient, patient, listening. It is not a place of violence, nor a place of fear, but a place where the world seems to move according to an older tempo, one that does not always align with human expectation. As the day passed and the ship continued its slow course across the triangle, the sea maintained that soft, expectant calm. The air remained warm, the sky remained open, and the water beneath the hull carried that faint, unnameable presence, as though holding memory deeper than any current. The crew spoke quietly, as if in respect, not afraid, simply aware that this place was ancient. And in that awareness, the mystery grew larger, not as a threat, but as an invitation to look closer, listen deeper, and understand that the world still held corners where time behaved differently. Not dramatically, not dangerously, but gently. And so, as the sun drifted once more toward the edge of the horizon, the ship continued forward, carried not only by wind and current, but by the slow unfolding of the triangle's quiet enigma. Thus, the mystery rested once more beneath the quiet passage of time. Morning arrived with a softness that almost felt deliberate, as though the sky had chosen a gentler shade of gold, and the ocean chosen smaller, more thoughtful waves to usher the ship into another day. There was no wind at first, only a mild breath of air brushing across the deck, as if the sea itself were waking slowly. Far out in the open horizon, the light shimmered upon the water in long, wavering lines, a pattern that seemed almost rhythmic, like the quiet pulse of something living deep below. And in that gentle dawn, more of the triangle's older stories began to rise. These were not tales of danger, but of echoes. Echoes that moved beneath the surface, traveling through currents, whispering through the deep water like memories that refused to fade. They were the kinds of echoes that ancient sailors described without fully understanding, and that modern scientists heard without fully explaining. And together, they formed a picture of a sea that remembered more than it revealed. The pulse of the seafloor oceanographic surveys from the late 20th century revealed something unusual beneath the central region of the triangle, a series of gentle oscillations within the seafloor. Not earthquakes, not volcanic tremors, something softer, a slow rising and lowering of the terrain, as though the earth beneath the ocean took long, quiet breaths of its own. Dr. Mara Ellington, one of the researchers who first documented this phenomenon, described it in her journals. It feels less like movement and more like recollection, as if the ground beneath these waters remembers a shape it once held and shifts gently to recall it. Her measurements showed that the seafloor rose and fell only a few centimeters, too subtle to be felt by ships, too slow to qualify as seismic activity, but regular enough to be unmistakable. Older sailors had described this same sensation in simpler words. The ocean moved beneath us, though the waves were small. At the time, it had been dismissed as metaphor. Yet Ellington's work suggested that the old mariners had sensed something real, something that modern instruments could finally observe, though not yet interpret. Theories ranged widely. Underground gas pockets shifting slow sediment compression, thermal expansion from deep currents, or ancient fault lines adjusting subtly over long periods, but none of these explanations fully matched the patterns. Whatever caused the movement, it did not disturb the water violently. It simply shaped it. A long, continuous, barely perceptible shaping that affected compasses, currents, and the trajectories of vessels in ways no one had expected. It was like an invisible hand beneath the sea, smoothing the fabric of the ocean as gently as one might smooth the page of an old book. The quiet signals, the deeper the researchers listened, the more they found. Hydrophones, deep water listening instruments, picked up sounds beneath the triangle that did not match whale song, nor tectonic rumbling, nor volcanic activity. These were low, drawn-out tones, too regular to be noise, too soft to be detected without specialized equipment. Dr. Ellington called them the long notes of the deep. They occurred in slow intervals, sometimes separated by minutes, sometimes by hours, never predictable. These sounds did not signal distress nor reveal any danger. Instead, they suggested presence, a living complexity beneath the ocean floor that moved at its own pace and did not announce itself to the surface world. When older sailors wrote of hearing long moans of the water or a hum beneath the hull at night, they were likely describing these same vibrations, though without the language of modern science. One fisherman in 1894 wrote, "There is a tone in these waters, too low for the ear but felt in the bones." He believed it was the sea's way of speaking, a slow language, older than storms, older than maps. And perhaps he was not wrong. For in many parts of the world, the ocean is known to communicate through deep resonant sounds, tones that travel farther than waves or wind, tones that carry memory. And the Bermuda Triangle, with its unusual currents and shifting seafloor, held many such echoes. The lost bathymetric charts in the early 1900s, long before advanced sonar mapping existed, a small team of oceanographers attempted to chart the underwater slopes of the region using weighted lines and manual depth measurement. They expected the process to be slow but predictable. What they found was neither predictable nor consistent. Depths measured at one location changed subtly from month to month, sometimes by a few meters, sometimes by dozens. Water does not usually behave this way. Seafloors do not usually drift, yet the triangle in its ancient quiet way seemed to breathe. Not enough to alarm anyone, never violently, but consistently enough that the old charts became unreliable within weeks. The team concluded, the terrain beneath these waters is incomplete in our understanding, a shape not yet settled. When modern sonar mapping revisited these areas decades later, some of the slopes still showed similar anomalies, not errors but fluctuations, as though the ground itself carried a patient restlessness that had endured for centuries. The sea that remembers by afternoon, the ship in our story moved deeper into the center of the triangle, its hull gliding across the calm water as though carried by an unseen gentleness. The ocean here did not roar. It did not rise in storms. It did not crash into the vessel nor push against it with force. Instead, it felt like a place filled with memory. Water does not remember in the way humans do. But currents remember paths, sediments remember movement, and the deep ocean remembers every sound that travels through it. And in this region, those memories felt closer to the surface. The crew commented quietly among themselves. Words like still, old, and deep passed softly between them, spoken with the same tone sailors had used for generations. Even the instruments on the deck reflected this presence. Not malfunctioning, but reading with a slight delay as if the needles moved a heartbeat slower here than in other waters. Not wrong, just slow, measured, patient, as if taking time to think. The captain, an experienced mariner with decades of travel behind him, stood quietly at the helm. He had crossed these waters before, though never this far into the center. He watched the horizon with calm eyes and said softly, "The sea is listening today." And indeed, it felt so. The marble trenches below them, though unseen, lay one of the triangle's strangest features, a series of curving trench-like formations that resembled carved marble corridors when viewed through deep-sea imaging. These channels were smooth, rounded, and unlike the jagged cracks formed by earthquakes. Some researchers believed they were shaped by ancient volcanic plumes that had cooled slowly over millennia. Others believed they were the remnants of landslides from a forgotten plateau that once existed above the ocean's surface. But a small group of geologists held a different theory, that these formations were shaped by a long-forgotten geologic event so old that only these soft, curved remnants remained. The trenches formed a looping pattern that did not align with modern ocean currents or continental drift. Instead, they hinted at a structure that once existed and was later reclaimed by the sea. And if the seafloor still shifted, breathing softly, exhaling gently, perhaps these ancient shapes still echoed beneath the water. The drift of memory as the day matured into golden afternoon, a mild mist rose above the water, not thick, not blinding, just enough to soften the horizon and make distances unclear. The ship slowed slightly, not by mechanical choice, but by the subtle resistance of the water around it. The captain noted, The current pulls as though remembering an older direction. This was a common effect in the triangle. Currents did not always flow strictly according to surface charts. They curved, looped, behaved in ways that felt almost instinctive. Some oceanographers believed these currents followed the shapes of the ancient trenches below, as though the memory of the seabed guided the water above. Others believed that tiny variations in temperature created pockets where water layers slid over one another like folds of soft fabric. Either way, ships drifting through the region found themselves subtly redirected, not by force, but by quiet encouragement. A 1-degree shift over many miles can feel like fate to a sailor, and the triangle with its patient, unhurried currents was a master of such gentle persuasion. The beneath-water murmurs later that evening. As the sun lowered in a long arc toward the western horizon, the ship's hydrophone picked up a distant, low-toned vibration. Barely audible, barely present. A soft, drawn-out resonance moving through the deep water like the hum of an enormous tuning fork. The crew listened quietly. No one spoke loudly. Even those unfamiliar with ocean sounds felt something ancient in the tone, not threatening, only persistent, like a memory returning from far below. Some believed such sounds came from shifting plates, or from deep-sea currents colliding far beneath the surface. Others believed these tones moved through hollow caverns within the underwater ridges, echoing like wind across old stone. Whatever their source, they created a sensation not of fear, but of depth, a reminder that the world beneath the hull was far older than any story told on its surface. The captain listened for several moments before quietly saying, "The sea is speaking from far away." And the crew understood, not the meaning but the sentiment. For the Bermuda Triangle was not a place of silence. It simply spoke in long, slow breaths that required patience to hear. The day's quiet end night approached smoothly, its arrival slow and unhurried. The sky washed itself in fading lavender, and the sea carried a stillness so complete that even the ship's wake seemed quieter. The crew lit soft lanterns along the deck, their warm glow reflecting gently upon the calm water. Far out in the darkness, small glimmers of bioluminescent light shimmered beneath the surface, not in lines this time, but in scattered bursts, as though the deep itself were sighing softly into the night. The captain stood near the bow and breathed in the warm ocean air, feeling something in the distance, a presence, a history, a quietness that seemed to stretch far beyond the horizon. Not danger, never danger, but depth, ancient depth. A sense that the waters ahead held stories written long before compass needles and far before charts. A place where memory drifted like unseen currents. The ship continued forward, carried by soft waves and the steady rhythm of its hull cutting through the water. And the triangle around it held its mysteries gently, as it had for centuries, never shouting, never startling, only waiting with patient calm to be understood. So, as the echoes of the ancient deep faded into the quiet of night, the mystery rested once more beneath the soft passage of time. As the ship pushed through the thick Bermuda mist, the rudder suddenly jerked on its own. The captain shouted, "Hold steady, something is pulling us." The compass spun wildly again, the crew froze in fear. And then on the upper deck, something appeared, a shadow. Human shape, drenched in water as if it had just climbed out of the ocean. Sailor Rahin whispered, "That uniform. It's from World War II, but that's impossible." The figure slowly walked forward. No face, just two empty, glowing eyes. Then it raised its arm and pointed northeast. Right in that direction, the ocean began to swirl a strange spiral as if a hidden doorway beneath the sea was opening. The captain yelled, "Full speed ahead, follow that direction." The crew was shocked. Should they follow a ghost soldier? But in the Bermuda Triangle, logic doesn't work. As the ship turned toward the swirling water, the ghostly soldier began to fade slowly, like drops of water dissolving in the air until it vanished completely. The ship raced toward the swirling vortex the ghost soldier pointed at. Waves slammed against the sides, and the wind howled like something alive. Suddenly, boom, the water lit up with a deep blue glow, swirling faster and faster, forming a perfect spiral, almost like a giant underwater gate. Rahin held the railing tightly. "Captain, is that thing even natural?" Before the captain could answer, a strange, low-frequency hum vibrated through the ship. Not a wave, not an engine. It felt alive. The navigator shouted, "Sir, I'm picking up signals, but it's not Morse code, it's something else, like a heartbeat." The humming sound grew louder. The ocean around them pulsed like massive lungs breathing beneath the water. Then from deep inside the glowing spiral, a shape surfaced. Huge, slow, and nothing like any submarine or sea creature known to mankind. The captain whispered, "What is that?" No one answered, because before their eyes, two enormous metallic panels slowly opened underwater like doors, releasing a beam of white light that shot straight toward their ship. The crew shielded their eyes, the light wrapped around them, flickering with symbols no one could understand. Rahin gasped, "Captain, I think it's scanning us." The The ship trembled violently, another pulse shot upward from the deep. Something ancient, something intelligence-driven, something waiting. And then a voice echoed from below the ocean. Not human, not machine, something in between. Entry permitted. The vortex shifted, pulling the ship forward like a magnet. The crew braced themselves as the ship was dragged into the blinding spiral straight into the unknown. The ship drifted deeper into the glowing spiral, carried not by waves, but by a silent current, a current that felt almost intentional. The blinding light softened, fading into a calm, moonlit blue. The crew opened their eyes slowly. They were no longer on the stormy surface of the Atlantic. They floated above a vast underwater world, not dark, not cold, but gently illuminated by lines of ancient symbols glowing across the ocean floor. Rayhan whispered, This isn't a place on any map." And he was right. The water here felt still, peaceful, heavier with memory. As if every lost ship, every missing pilot, every vanished signal had drifted here to rest. The captain noticed shapes below broken masts, rusted hulls, plain wings, old metal fragments, all arranged in perfect circles. Not chaos, order, like a museum of vanished history. The mysterious voice returned, this time softer, more like a whisper echoing through water and time. "These are not disasters." The crew stood motionless. "These are preservations." Rayhan asked, barely breathing, "Preservations of what?" The sea beneath them shimmered, and a vision unfolded like ripples on a quiet lake. Old ships drifting into storms that weren't storms, planes flying into clouds that weren't clouds, all being gently diverted downward, guided, not destroyed. Saved, the voice continued, "The ocean remembers more than the land. Your world forgets. The sea does not." The captain, overwhelmed, asked, "Why show us this?" The water pulsed once as if thinking. "Because you listened." The spiral beneath them slowed. The glowing symbols dimmed. The silent current changed direction. It was returning them. Rayhan looked around one last time. So many ships that had become legends, so many unsolved mysteries lying quietly in a place that asked for nothing except to remain unseen. Slowly, gently, the light lifted them upward. The deep blue faded back into gray ocean mist. Waves returned. Wind returned. The compass resumed spinning, then settled. The ship floated once more on the open Atlantic. The navigator checked his watch and froze. "Captain, only 12 minutes passed," though they had witnessed centuries of silence beneath the sea. The crew stood quietly, listening to the steady rhythm of the waves. Nothing chased them. No storm followed. Only a calm, endless ocean stretching toward the horizon. Rayhan finally spoke. "So, what do we tell the world?" The captain looked out at the peaceful water that now held stories he would never fully explain. He smiled faintly. "We tell them the sea is wide, and some mysteries are meant to be learned gently, not solved." He placed a hand on the ship's railing. "And we tell them everything we saw with respect." The ship turned slowly toward home, leaving the silent place behind. But the ocean felt different now, not an enemy, not a threat, but a keeper of history, a quiet guardian. As the sun dipped into the horizon, casting gold across the waves, the crew felt a strange peace wash over them, like a blessing from the deep. And so, as the echoes of the ancient world softened into the night, the mystery rested once more beneath the quiet passage of time, waiting, patient and gentle, for the next traveler who dared to listen.